This is 20 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on virtual power plants, or VPPs, my guest is Brian Lusher, Director for Load Flexibility with Duke Energy. Brian's going to describe Duke's growing demand response and VPP programs, how owners of distributed energy resources, or DER, have responded to the programs, and how they serve all Duke's customers with downward rate pressure and more reliable electricity delivery. Brian joined Duke Energy in 2017 as an engineer. After managing a group handling voltage and VAR control and a group in the residential demand side management program, and after being named a national fellow with the Clean Energy Leadership Institute in 2021, he became director for load flexibility in April 2025. So, Brian, let's start with Duke's Power Pair VPP program. Give us an overview. Tell us about the design and performance of it and what resources are eligible. How do you recruit and enroll customers? And importantly, how does it benefit customers who own Power Pair resources? And how does it benefit customers who don't own those resources?
First off, Herman, thanks for having me. Appreciate getting to be here and talk with your listeners. So I'll start off a little bit with what Power Pair is trying to accomplish. In North Carolina, we've been working on a pilot that pairs customer-sited solar. We're talking about that standard rooftop solar that you can see on some of your neighbors' homes with battery storage that a lot of these customers might be less familiar with. So customers can get both the resilience benefits of being able to capture that solar energy in the storage on their home, then also get bill benefits as well for these programs. And really, the benefit to Duke Energy as part of it is that the grid gets flexible capacity that we can call on when it really matters. So, as I mentioned, this has been a pilot program in North Carolina for the past couple years, but there's some exciting components of it. First, wanted to start off. There's a $9,000 upfront incentive that can help offset the installation costs, the technology costs for these customers that are getting these relatively expensive systems. And one of the key pieces about the program,
Brian,
yeah, go ahead.
well, I don't, sorry to interrupt you. I apologize, but you were going to talk about the key pieces. I just want to mention $9,000 up front is a pretty this reasonable piece of change to participate. But go ahead, carry on.
Yeah, it is relatively large, and really the reason for that, it was part of our clean energy portfolio standard in North Carolina, where we wanted to identify, is this a good alternative source when we're looking for clean solutions for customers? And so, being able to pay those customers significant upfront incentive obviously piques their interest, and makes them want to look at these options for other programs when they might not have been thinking about that already. But really, one of the key pieces of this is that we wanted customers to have options. And so the customer, when they get this $9,000 upfront incentive, they can choose to self-control that battery. They can join the existing time of use rate programs and decide when do they charge and discharge that battery, really for their own energy arbitrage, their own bill savings. But then the unique piece of this is there's also the utility control method. So this falls under our traditional demand response portfolio that I manage. And that's really giving the utility the ability to control these batteries exactly when the system needs them. So we're forecasting ahead of time. We're making decisions on when we need to control those batteries. And the customer doesn't have to think about this. We've got 30 to 36 events per year that we're running, and we're paying these customers an additional $300 to $600 range, depending on the size of their battery, which obviously, as you mentioned, 9,000 is great, but really the ongoing payment of that $300 to $600 range for these batteries keeps the customer interested in making sure that their device is connected, that it's reliable, but then really the peace of mind that they don't have to think about that or really understand the nuances of, well, what time should I be discharging this battery, or when's the best time for the grid. So one of your pieces here was really around recruiting customers. We haven't changed the process on the customer recruitment. These are kitchen table discussions. These are solar installers. We have a number of partners throughout the Carolinas that we work with to talk to these customers, really share the benefits of these programs. And I think that gains a lot of trust. People know the Duke Energy name, but they're also meeting face to face with somebody that can tell them the benefits of this program. And because we've had these relationships with these solar trade allies over a number of years, the trade allies are experts in this offering, and they've got enough experience to really rely on prior customers of theirs when they're giving details to these individual customers as well. But that trade ally walks the customer through the interconnection process. They do the enrollment work for them. They make sure that the battery is going to be compliant and the customer is going to confidently get that bill. And then they also work on the customer's behalf to make sure that we're getting all those bills correctly to the customer, that there's no issues after the customer's been enrolled in that offering.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because one of the key elements I can remember when these programs were first rolled out, one of the key elements in getting everybody on board was giving those partners that you have the opportunity to participate. But I want to get to one more thing before we move on to the next question, Brian. You made it really clear how these things benefit the customers who own solar and batteries and participate. But you quickly passed over the way that it benefits all customers, even if they don't own solar and batteries, because you have that load flexibility that allows you to reduce costs to the utility. We don't have to go into the details of where those costs come from. We can. But the point is, by reducing the cost to the utility, you're reducing everybody's rates. Is that right? Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. These have to pass traditional cost effectiveness tests. These are tests that are used really across the country to make sure that the benefits always outweigh the cost of these programs. The number one cost for these programs is incentives to customers. There's certainly some costs on the technology side of this, and the supporting marketing materials and other items on the administrative side. But the benefits is really key, that it's getting passed over to all customers. And so it's allowing us to avoid or defer the cost for more expensive system investments really across the stack of generation, transmission, and distribution that we would otherwise be investing.
Okay. And you actually gave me a perfect segue when you said, that there are other technologies that uh, may incur costs. I wanted to ask you, as Duke adds more of these customer-owned solar and battery resources into its Power Pair program, I was wondering, don't operations become a little bit more challenging? I hear a lot about people needing tools, especially the Distributed Energy Resources Management System, or DERMS. Some of them talk about a grid edge DERM. Some of them talk about a DERMS in the control room. Some talk about both kinds of DERMS. And they say that these things are becoming more necessary. Is Duke finding that? Why or why not?
Yeah, great question. Derms is absolutely a hot topic. If you've been at any of the industry conferences over the past couple of years, it is probably front and center and the number one discussed topic in those conversations. And so you're correct in that it adds additional complexity, but I would say what it really is requiring is an operational mindset. And so traditionally, if you were only operating some of these resources at peak and you're now looking to integrate more resource types, some differences when we're talking about storage is there's the charging component as well as the discharging component. All of that adds a little bit of complexity. But the thing I want to remind people is that we've really been doing this for decades, about 40 years of demand response experience at Duke Energy in some of our territories. We now have over 1 million customers on these programs and about 2,000 megawatts in the winter and around 2,500 megawatts of capability in the summer. So that's about the size of a nuclear power plant that we can dispatch at those peak times to offset the use of some other natural gas peaking plant or some other facility that we would need to be using. And so we've got a number of appliance types that are in these programs. We've got HVAC systems, both on the air conditioning and the heating side of that, pool pump programs, water heater programs, certainly smart thermostats. We obviously just talked about batteries. And then, really, when you step into that small and medium business and the commercial side, we've got backup generators as well as curtailable load programs. So, when you look across this really as a portfolio of items, it's not just one technology or one communications pathway. It's really spread across the board for the tools that we need to make this work. And really going back into this operational piece of it, what I really like to do is break up the planning and the operations side into the range that they're looking at. We've got that longest range planning team that's developing the integrated resource plans where we include our demand response, controllable resources, and that way we decide what we need to go build. Then you start looking at a much shorter range. So about 2 weeks out, you start to have some weather certainty. You know what resources you're going to need and be able to dispatch on the grid. You know if you have any plant outages going on in your other fossil generating units. And so you can pre-schedule some of these controllable resources in advance. And then, of course, in the real-time operations control room, you always have the ability to hit the big red button and control all of those events as needed. When we're talking about the software to make that happen, I'd say there's really like four main things that have to happen. So you've got to be able to integrate different device types. You have to be able to manage that customer enrollment. You have to be able to dispatch events, and then you also have to be able to measure what happened. You can imagine you're sitting in the control room, press this big red button. You really would like to know what was the output of that event, and I really get the results that I was expecting to see. So your comment earlier around grid derms, edge derms, they provide different components to that. Do I think 5 years out, 10 years out, all of that's going to be integrated into a really high quality technology stack? Absolutely. But I think for right now, you've got some expertise in the grid software side. You have some expertise in these like smarter, like consumer device types. And what's being built today in the industry is that connection between those. And so we certainly rely on a number of partners, Energy Hub, Itron, Eaton, and some internally built tools to make that architecture work. But really, these virtual power plants only matter if it performs like a grid resource. Our operators don't care if it's just going to operate off on its own. It's not really part of the overall planning, scheduling, and dispatching process. And so our team is constantly working to make that better for all the users across the board.
Here's a quick note from the sponsor of our series of podcasts about virtual power plants, Energy Hub. What if everyday devices had the potential to strengthen the grid when it's needed most? Energy Hub helps utilities turn that potential into dependable capacity by coordinating thermostats, EVs, batteries, and other devices so they work together as virtual power plants or VPPs that respond to grid needs in near real time. Energy Hub's latest white paper lays out a maturity model for VPPs that can be planned and dispatched with the same confidence as conventional plants while being 40 to 60% less expensive to build. That's why more than 160 utilities across North America partner with Energy Hub to manage over 2.5 million devices that provide 3.4 gigawatts of flexible capacity. Read the white paper and discover what VPPs can do for your grid at energyhub.com. Wow, that's about as clear a description of the situation as I have ever heard, Brian. Thank you so much. And for our listeners, we have podcasts in this series on VPPs with Itron and Energy Hub so you can hear them tell their side of the story. Um, and the other thing that you said that I think I want to mention in passing, Brian, is that this has been around a long time as demand response. And what you're describing is what other people have said is an evolution from demand response into VPPs when you're adding all these other devices, all these other technologies. Would you agree that that's kind of an evolution there?
I'd say it is, and I love that it still falls into the same group working on these same topics because it's things that they've wanted for years, and now the technology is finally caught up. I mean, we were dealing with one-way paging switch devices. We still are, and we're converting those slowly over to two-way 4G capability. But knowing when a customer opts out is key. That's a indication from that customer that they were uncomfortable, and it's something that you never had in the past, and maybe the customer didn't want to pick up the phone to call into your call center. So I think the lessons learned from what we've wanted to know in customer experience, like notifying our customers of when they're going to be controlled, why they're being controlled, how it's helping the grid, how are we keeping them comfortable, and then also layering in the benefit they're providing to the overall system, and then again translating that and giving that back to all customers that are getting benefits from this. It's a great evolution, and love to be a part of it.
Yeah, I think some people have said that VPP is not a good acronym because it's neither virtual nor a power plant, but actually, it seems to me that it's virtual in the sense that it's in your control room on your dashboard. It doesn't exist in one place like a traditional power plant, and it's becoming a power plant, and that's really important. Energy Hub has this new concept of the Hewell's test, and we can hear about that in the podcast with Energy Hub. But I want to move on to another question, Brian. I know Duke has run pilots exploring ways to use other flexible customer-owned resources like managed EV charging. How does managed EV charging fit into Duke's broader strategy? And how have managed charging pilots performed? And once again, the big two-part question, what benefits does a managed charging program add for EV drivers and for customers who don't own EVs?
Yeah, great question. I'm sure you, like a lot of your listeners, are watching this EV market. We were kind of expecting it to take off a little bit more significantly over the past couple of years, but it's still growing. A lot of the manufacturers are still offering new models of electric vehicles. So the managed EV piece of this really fits into our overall strategy, both as like a load management tool, but also like a grid optimization opportunity. If we're able to help align charging for these vehicles with the low cost, the cleaner energy, whether that's in a workplace charging environment or some other way to where it matches when the grid has excess capacity, we think that's really going to be key to, again, support the benefits to all customers and not just really add to that peak period. We talked a little bit earlier on how we use traditional cost benefit analyses and these tests to make sure that these programs are cost effective. So for the Duke Energy Carolinas region, we are winter peaking. And so we need these resources to be available in that 6 to 7 o'clock hour or so on a winter cold morning. And what we found historically is that there's really not a lot of EV charging going on at that period. These vehicles are plugged in after work and they're done charging by that period. And so there's really not a lot of pure managed charging value that we've seen so far, and that's why we haven't scaled up those programs in the Carolinas. We are continuing to explore any ability to potentially offset some of the preconditioning load as those batteries are warming up. People are warming up the cabins of these vehicles. Again, we know that there's a customer experience piece of that. No one is out here buying an electric vehicle because they want the utility to be using the battery from their vehicle. So we have to keep those things in mind. But we're absolutely looking at all of these opportunities for giving value back to the customer for choosing an electric vehicle and also supporting all customers. I would say the most exciting thing that's on the horizon is that these manufacturers are also working on vehicle to grid capability. And that's
Yep.
really converting the vehicle into a mobile storage asset that has the two-way capability to support the overall grid. And we've got teams that are working on the technology with those manufacturers to prove out really those use cases and also make sure that it's protecting the systems that we already have installed on the grid just to make sure that everyone stays safe and there's no issues from an experience standpoint. The one other thing I want to flag though with electric vehicles is really this when you start getting into some of the localized questions and concerns. If you have a lot of adoption in a really localized area, a couple of neighbors all buying electric vehicles, they're all charging at that exact same time, starts to require us to look into the benefit of understanding exactly where those vehicles are, what's the infrastructure that's directly being impacted by that loading that also adds some potential value to the managed charging roadmap, but certainly things that we're working on right now.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting. I'm going to do a teaser here for our listeners. I've been doing a lot of reporting in this area recently, and there's no question. Everybody I talk to, car manufacturers uh, and other players in this area of managed charging agree. The world is telling us the future of transportation is electric. Now, I'm not putting this on Duke. I'm saying this, and this is what people are telling me. And so everybody continues, like Duke, to work on preparing for when that happens here in this country. There's solutions to that local issue that Brian was just describing, and there's some really exciting things going on. But that's all I'm going to say. Read my article in Utility Dive to learn the rest. Brian, to close this out, I want to take a quick forward look. We're a little low on time. I want to see what you think is the full potential of these virtual power plants in the Duke Energy territory. Are you going to be able to integrate all these devices, EVs, smart thermostats, batteries, other smart devices, and use those DERMS capabilities that you described to manage peaks even better as they get bigger? And are you going to be able to use these VPPs to provide other system services? I don't really have time for you to give a complete answer for that, but just briefly, what can you say about where you're going?
Yeah, we absolutely think there is going to be growth in the potential of virtual power plants, these controllable resources. And there's going to be significant growth there that we represent in our integrated resource plans. But I also don't want to oversell that capability. It requires customer adoption, good program design, It's not going to prevent us from building every resource with the load growth that we're seeing on the system, but it's absolutely going to offset some of those other investments that we'd be making. And so, just a quick flag for some recent improvements we've been making. We've done enhancements on our large customer programs. We've increased set incentives on a number of our programs. Launched one of the first grid-connected water heater programs with remanufacturing last year in the Floridas and Carolinas. And then also we launched, or we will be launching a non-residential storage program later this year that recently got approved in South Carolina. So I think you'll see new program designs, new offerings out there for customers, and that's going to be part of that growth. And then, of course, we want to continue growing the existing programs in the portfolio that we have today. So, yes, all of the above. Looking forward to continued growth in the sector.
Yeah, everybody is seeing the headlines on load growth and, oh my goodness, are we going to be able to prevent blackouts? And the truth is that the other side of the coin is all this activity that utilities like Duke and other players in the ecosystem are doing to solve these problems. We don't get enough attention on that, Brian, but that's a podcast for another day. I want to thank you. My guest has been Duke Energy Director for Load Flexibility, Brian Lusher, for describing how Duke's increasingly sophisticated VPP programs are providing already downward rate pressure and more reliable electricity delivery for all Duke's customers. I also want to thank my producer, Melissa Brown, and our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.